Hello, everyone, and sorry for the delay today. So, my name is Sabine, and I am the host of the leadership track today. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce Maryam Umar. She is the head of quality engineering at Booking.com, and since she has started her career, she is working in the field of QA testing in different industries. Today, she is joining us from her vacation in Australia. So, thank you, Mariam, for being there, although you are on holiday. For Mariam, as a leader, she welcomes to work with diverse teams for assuring a higher quality. And she's also engaging herself besides the work for young talents. To do that, she has been giving presentations at schools and universities about all the opportunities we have in our industry and the advantages and also the possibility to be very creative working in software industry. Today, she will talk about metrics. Metrics is a commonly discussed topic, and she will tell us which metrics she is using in her work and what kind of feedback they deliver to her, and also how she promotes those metrics to her teams so that the teams buy in for using these metrics. But before Miriam will start, just a quick reminder from the organizers. Our knowledge partner, Pact and Manning, will award the most active attendees with a free ebook. Therefore, you just have to rate sessions, leave comments, or ask questions for the Q&A. So very pretty easy. But now it's time for Miriam to start. The stage is yours. Enjoy it.
Thank you, Sabine, and thank you everyone for being patient. I think we, as people who are in the testing world, are the best testers when it comes to doing this work online. I'll quickly share my screen, Sabine, if you can just confirm. Um, right. Please let me know when you see that I'm sharing. Is this okay, Sabine? Hello? Okay. I'll just assume it's working. Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being online. And I think thanks to me for doing this whilst I'm on vacation. I'd actually planned to come to Australia basically to watch cricket. um, I'm originally from Pakistan, and cricket is just really important for us. So we bought tickets for the games back in 2020, and of course, nothing happened then. So now we're finally here. My voice is a little bit hoarse, so please bear with me. It's because of all the shouting in the games. Right, I'm originally from London, and as Sabine told everybody, I've worked in quite a few industries, and I've been working as a manager for about 6 years now. And something which I find really challenging, and something which I still really struggle in, is when we talk about metrics, and why metrics are important. So today, for the course of this talk, I will talk about what does measuring quality really mean to me, what types of metrics have I used in the teams I've worked with, which ones have been good, which ones have not been really useful. And then, we'll try and talk about more about, how do you figure out what are the right items that you should measure. So, for most of us, when we come into these quality engineering manager roles, or QA manager or testing manager, or all of these roles, one of the first things we're asked to do is, can you tell us how the quality of the software is? Now, quality is something which we should all understand is quantitative or qualitative. And what that means is that some things we can actually measure. So, for example, if we talk about, say, you're listening to music in your on Spotify or SoundCloud or Apple Music or whatever you use for listening music to, and some people may say, "Oh my God, that song sounds amazing," because the bass is amazing, the beat's amazing, it's really sharp. Um, but when they all say the word "the bass is amazing," what makes the bass amazing? Is it 100? Is it a 200? Is it a 300? The sound quality is really sharp. It's all things that we feel are of great quality, but how do we quantify it? How do we say that the app we're using is of great quality? Because let's say, for example, I'm currently working at booking.com. I'm sure most of you have used that website quite a lot. Some of you may say the quality of the website is amazing because whenever they've tried to book a hotel or anything else, they've had a seamless journey, meaning they were able to search really easily, they were able to pay really easily, and the email came into their inbox and they could see it in the app, and that was a great experience. But then for us as an organization, how do we know that we're delivering a quality product? There are many things we could use to measure that. One of them could be the number of people looking for a hotel versus how many actually book, a term called look to book ratio. How many people actually stay on the site, how many people return to the website, and so on. These are all items which we can actually measure, which helps us determine that the product has been developed in a way which makes people happy. And that's what I think quality is really about. In my experience, I've realized that quality is something which can be measured for many things when it comes to the software engineering world. We can talk about quality for processes, quality for engineering, and quality for releases, and that's something I've seen a lot of. Um, Process quality is something I think which is really important to think about because if you think about how you're doing code reviews or how are we doing estimation, um, if the teams don't follow the processes right, then it can really impact how the team develops the code base. I was speaking to Sabine earlier, and we were talking about agility and the processes that come with it. Um, I think it's very important to understand that if one team is using Kanban and one team is using Scrum, do those processes actually help work or help the team work efficiently, or is that something that they need to work on just because the quality of their throughput isn't great? Another aspect of quality is engineering, which is what a lot of us come across. Engineering quality is something which can be measured in many ways. And something I want to really point out here is that we should really concentrate on how the actual engineering is done versus the person doing the engineering. And that could be something like, oh, so and so in the team has done 10 um code reviews in this sprint, but they actually did not deliver any feature or any part of a feature in this sprint. Whereas another person in the team could have delivered a lot of features, but has not really contributed to the code review process. So you really want to think about the distribution of responsibility in the team because it does impact how you're creating the software you're working on. Another thing we can think about is when it comes to code reviews. Code reviews are an essential part of engineering. So, how are the code reviews happening in the team? How frequently are they happening? How many defects are found or lost as a result of a good or bad code review? Do we have principles and so on? And these are things which can really help a team become efficient and improve the quality of what they're delivering, and in turn, reduce the cost of delivery as well. And the last one is release quality. This is something one of my CEOs used to ask me all the time. They used to say to me, Maryam, can you tell me as head of QA, how is the release looking? And it for me was really hard to understand what did they mean by how is the release looking. Does it mean that we're on track? Yes, we said we will deliver 10 features as an engineering team. We are going to deliver 10 features. Or does it mean that I'm going to say we are going to deliver 10 features, but we found 100 defects, which three of them are high priority? That can tell us about, okay, we've been too quick in how we're writing code and not been efficient when it comes to reviewing code. So really release quality is something which can be combined with how our engineering processes work, but also we can think about it as how many defects escaped the process or how many issues did we find whilst we were doing test automation and so on. So there's many aspects of quality that we can think about in any organization. I want to talk a little bit about metrics. Something I want to point out here is that my inspiration from metrics has come from the book Accelerate, written by Jez Humble, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, and Gene Kim, and also the State of DevOps report. which has now become the DORA project. I do encourage everybody to take a look at the State of DevOps report if you can't read the whole book. Um, they do talk about high performing teams and low performing teams, but really it's about the throughput or the outcome rather than the output. Some things that we think about when we talk about quality assurance is defect rate. Defect rate is something which everybody just jumps on. A lot of people say, oh, can we have a no defect policy in the organization we're working on? No defects did not necessarily mean that the quality of the product is high. It could be that the defects are hiding and they're really difficult use cases that we haven't discovered yet. Um, Defect rate, why it's so commonly used is because it's really easy to extract that information. Most organizations use a tool like Jira or Trello boards and so on, and it's really easy to log those defects in the system and you can extract that information. What's important is that you need to think about how these defects impact the code base. Um, for example, if you have 3 or 4 environments, let's say most places have a local dev, staging, pre-prod, or prod production environment. How many defects did we find in dev versus staging? Because staging means it's become too late. The whole idea of being able to find defects early, which is the concept of shift left of testing that we hear a lot about nowadays, is um, you really need to think about why it's important to find these defects early, because it reduces the cost of fixing them, which actually means the time taken to fix them. Another one is you can think about how many defects were reported by release in a release. That could really be if you are in a customer facing product like I am. You could talk to your customer service teams and so on, and they could tell you, okay, these are the areas where people have most questions in, or they keep finding issues when they're trying to end up, let's say, trying to submit a card with a specific provider and so on. And that can really help you assess how many defects are escaping. So it's important to understand that you're not just reporting, I found 10 defects. What does that 10 defect mean? Okay, a step further could be 2 of those were high, were critical, 3 were high. Okay, how do you know that they were critical? What defines the criticality of a defect? Do you have examples? Do you have an SLA or something you have internally defined as an organization? Which then really helps you understand what that key indicator is bringing in. The next one, which we see a lot of, is test automation. Um, I used to get asked in one of my jobs a lot that when can we automate the whole product? And I used to just think you can't do test automation for an entire product, really. There will always be use cases um, which are difficult to automate, not to say that they cannot be automated, but it's important to understand that is it worth the effort to automate those difficult use cases if it's going to take me 2 hours to run that test manually versus 2 weeks to automate it and still it'll be flaky? I'd rather not automate it. So you really need to think about what are you measuring when it comes to test automation. We could go down the route of the test pyramid or the honeycomb model, which a lot of organizations are now using. And the honeycomb model, for people who don't know about it, it really talks about having a big bulk of integration tests automated, because that's really where most issues are found versus a big chunk of unit tests or a big chunk of end-to-end tests. um, so something you can measure when it comes to test automation is, okay, how many of those user journeys have we automated, and of those user journeys, how many of those tests run reliably, because it's one thing to automate all of the tests, it's another thing to make sure that they run reliably. And that is something which I'm really trying to tackle in my current team. um, that's a really good baseline to start with. If you go in any organization, I find that you're really establishing what are the foundations of the user journeys that we expect people to use, just because that is what is generating revenue for an organization. And then go backwards and look into, okay, can we automate it? Yes. What type of test can we write? Is it an end-to-end test? Is it an integration test? I do try and shy away a little bit from unit tests. Not saying that we shouldn't write unit tests, but unit tests really support the developer because it helps ensure and confirm for them that they're not changing the entire functionality when they're making small changes. It helps them to find that response very quickly. But as people in quality assurance, we really need to think about metrics for functional test coverage, and that's something which I think is really important when it comes to test automation. Another common metric which a lot of people ask is, how many regression tests do we have? Again, does that define quality? And that's something I feel that we should really try and question. Having 100 regression tests does not mean that a user is always able to find the hotel that they want to book for. The regression test could be around person logging in, person changing their password, person changing their card details, person changing their email address. There could be many things, but it's missing the key piece. So again, I think test automation and regression tests need to go hand in hand, and that's very important. Another thing we should also try and measure when it comes to regression tests is, how long does it actually take to execute those tests? Sometimes it's very easy to go down the route of automating everything, but again, the whole idea of test automation is fast feedback. And if the feedback is going to take 3 hours, the engineer, developer, tester, whoever it is who's looking after the sign off of a feature, will lose track. They'll get pulled into a meeting, or they'll go away for lunch and they'll come back and they'll be like, oh my God, I have test failures now. I need to revert my code changes and pull it back from the code base. So you really need to think about making sure that they're not only easy to write, but they're also easy to run and provide genuine fast feedback. Some other metrics, which I don't think we see a lot of generally, but I think they do provide a lot of great feedback to the teams and also to help us to determine quality, um, are some of the ones which I've listed here. The first one is speed of development. I think this is something which is really important to think about, and this is where it also helps you understand what the velocity we're using for a team to produce some outcomes is really correct. Because it could be that a feature is taken, let's say, for everybody's using Fibonacci sequence, which is quite common. If something is a 13-point story and it's taking 4 weeks to develop, um, but some another feature which is of a similar size after we've developed, but it was estimated as an 8-point delivery. It really is important to figure out whether the velocity that we're trying to chalk to determine the speed of development is correct or not. Um, Something I found, this was back in one of my jobs, I think 6 years ago. One of the scrum masters I had did an excellent job. That whenever the team would estimate something as an 8 or a 13 or a 5, they actually used to pull out a story which was completed, which has the same estimate. And they say, so are you saying this previous story that we worked on, which was an estimate of 5, this new one that we're estimating, they're of the same size? And that activity really helped us think a little bit more about whether the indicator that we're using to help determine when a new feature will be released is actually correct, or do we need to revisit this as a team. Another metric which I've found, which is really interesting, is mean time to green. I actually spoke to Jez Humble about this, and what this metric can mean is that most people use CI/CD, and we all know that when we're trying to build on branches, they do fail. But how long does it take for a red build in a team to go green? That really helps us in understanding whether we will meet the SLA to fix a critical issue in production as well. It's not only about the speed of fixing something, it's also about how easy is it to read the code base in that area, how well has the knowledge been distributed, and so on. And these this number can really be used to help assess those aspects. Another one, which I think is something related to the previous two that I mentioned before, is defect rate in relation to the automated tests. I remember in one of my teams, we were getting a lot of defects being reported by our client. And we had a lot of test automation in place. And the question was, why do we keep finding defects are reported? How did we miss this? And this is where the language really needs to change. It's not only about what the tests are, what the defects are. It's also about the defects in relation to the automated tests. The tests are providing us fast feedback, but are they also helping us discover issues? Because if we're finding more issues by doing manual testing, which is what happened in this team, I actually challenged the team. I went away, I looked at the code base, I looked at um, the time it took to release a feature and how many defects we found as a result of that release of that feature being released, and then how many of those defects were actually found manually versus by the automation tests. And what was happening in this specific example was that the team was actually finding more defects when we're doing manual testing. That means our automation testing philosophy was actually flawed. And what happened actually was we discovered that our test automation framework was really difficult. So it wasn't that test automation was not helping us. This is where the whole idea of writing the right automation tests came in. And that really helped us pivot how we started writing tests and discovering defects as a result of running these automated tests. Another one, which I think is really important, is the quality of acceptance criteria. And I know this kind of overlaps into the process quality rather than the engineering or test quality. And this is something which greatly impacts how we are working as a team. Often I hear testers or test engineers come back to me and say, "Oh, I get a story which I need to test, and it only has a title. It has no description of what I should expect as a result of this code change." Um, and it's very important to push back on situations like this. I know people then say, "Oh, testers are the people who are defending who are the bad guys, and if we can do it, they can do it too." I understand, but at the end of the day, it's the documentation which really helps us clarify what should work and when. A couple of other uncommon metrics which I found was really interesting, and this is something one of my CTOs suggested. This was PR review rate and PR review size. We don't want to make the PR review, pull request review, or code review exercise really tedious. Um, it's important to think about code reviews being short. What's the type of code review size that's coming out in a team? If every code review will have 20 files changed, which is probably a norm in a team, of course it will take longer to review. Of course, we will miss things during the code review stage. So, how can we actually look at reducing the PR review size? Another one was, um, again, it's related to the size. You also need to think about, are the same people in the team reviewing the code reviews all the time? There's something about knowledge sharing which is missing here, and this is the type of information which is important to extract and give back to the team so they can really think about the quality of how they're doing their engineering practices. I've spoken about a few metrics, but it's really easy to get lost in numbers. I think I once produced a report which had like 35 metrics that we could get out. But it's not only about getting metrics, it's also about, sorry, please excuse me, I'm losing my voice again. It's also about understanding how many of those metrics are actually useful. Um, the other thing is also, am I always trying to extract the numbers, the metrics which are easy to extract? It's very important to not look at your tooling and really step back and think about what determines the quality of our product, what determines the quality of how our team is operating, what determines the quality of the processes we're using. So how do you know that you measure the right things? um, and also, how do you know that you need to measure something anyway? The first thing to think about here is you need to find your stakeholders. Who are the people who are saying to you, "Can you tell us what the quality of this release is? How is your team feeling about this release? What is your gut feel?" Gut feel is not enough when it comes to production. Um, you really need to talk to the people who will use these numbers. I've found in my experience that working with scrum masters, working with tech leads really, really helps. the goal here is not to pinpoint problems. It's very important to think about metrics in a very positive way. I've always said in my jobs, for example, that defects are a good thing. Defects found by the team at whatever stage, that's something we can improve on, is a very good thing because we as engineers are finding the defects. Incidents or production incidents are a bad thing. They should not really happen. So I think this one, it's important to create some positivity around the numbers you're extracting. And secondly, speak to the people who you'll create these numbers for. For example, we spoke about PR review size. That's something I've used in a team where code reviews were just not happening. And you give that number to the team. And then they start discussing at stand up that, okay, we have 10 tickets waiting for code review. Why is that happening? We're 2 days away from finishing the sprint. You want to give them conversational points. And this is where it's important to think about not only the people who will use the metrics, but also assist them in using the right language to use the metrics. Um, Another thing which is really important is I actually used to create a state of quality report in one of my organizations. And when it comes to extracting metrics, um you can create numbers and numbers. You can create pages and pages of this information. But what is it that you want your exec team to do? For example, what I started doing was that at the top of your state of quality report or the email or whatever you use to report quality on, you can say, okay, these are the top three things I need you to action for me. One is releases are late because there's too many stories in the sprint for half of the teams. You need to uh, give us some time to have maybe a no feature sprint or a no feature quarter for us to really assess our processes. That's the action point I expect from an exec team. Another action point could be that um, the tooling we're using to write test automation. So, for example, an organization could be using Java for the code base, but the tests are written in Ruby, um, which doesn't encourage the engineering team to also write automated tests, which means that there's a lot of load towards the end of the sprint, which means that we do a lot more manual testing, which means it will take us longer to do regression testing. So we need time as a test automation team to invest in doing POCs for another test framework. This is the action point I want for the exec team because I want them to understand what is it that they would allow us or give us time to do. And they will not be able to understand this until we get them the information that they need. Um, Another piece, again, it ties in with the previous one, is that it's better to use a one-page report rather than pages and pages of information for each single team. One-page report could be, okay, our goal was to let's say our quarterly goal was to be able to run a regression test suite in half a day. What is the current status? Okay, it takes us 2 weeks to run regression tests. Okay, what are the items we can prioritize? And it really gives information to the scrum masters, tech leads, directors of teams to think about what are the pieces that they can focus on when they come to planning the work for the team for the next couple of quarters. Something which is also important to understand, especially when we talk about numbers, is to not focus on the people. To not say, so and so, let's say John found 10 defects in that team, and all of those features were written by Katie. That is not the goal for metrics. It's not about pinpointing, it's not about blame. It's more about Team Alpha found 10 defects during their sign off. What could we have done earlier so that we found those defects earlier in the cycle? It's really important to think about that. You are trying to measure the quality of how we are working, how we are testing, and not about the people in the team. You don't want to say, oh, Michael has done 10 code reviews in the team. Um, and all he does is code reviews. Yes, that could be fine, but that's not the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. The actual problem is the knowledge. There are too many new people in the team, so how do we include some knowledge sharing sessions in the team? so that we improve this process. So again, it's important to think about how will you help the teams use metrics, because at the end of the day, metrics are not only about reporting the product quality, it's also about helping the team to work more efficiently. You could think about, okay, are we using the right test frameworks? Are we actually defining our acceptance criteria properly? Is there a lot of flux between tickets moving from in test to in dev, in test to in dev, which means that there's something missing? Maybe it's an environment piece or something, or it takes too long for tickets to go from dev to staging. You really need to work with each single team. And that could mean you're talking to 70 teams. It could mean you're talking to 7 teams. It could mean you're talking to the CTO. It really depends on the type of organization you're in, but those are the people who will actually use the data. You're not there to boast about, oh, I my team wrote 10 automate 100 test automation scenarios, that's why the product quality is great. No, the quality of the product, and this is where we keep saying quality is a whole team approach. You need to get to you need to measure items which the teams want to understand better. You cannot say, um, for example, that we have achieved 100% test coverage in the team. Yes, that's fine. But the same teams or set of teams which are working on one part of the product area, we always have production incidents. There's something wrong there. And that's where the investigation needs to happen. Um, Everybody needs to work together when it comes to things like these. So, in conclusion, something I want to say is that, in my experience, one, it's important to work on measuring the product metrics rather than the team metrics. You want to look at the product the team is trying to deliver, how they're trying to write that. But then also, you want to think about who are the stakeholders of the numbers you're going to produce. Sometimes you could be producing something like, we have 100% test coverage. And when you drill down, it's actually unit test coverage, which does not mean that you're finding, you're actually covering all the use case journeys that really help us understand that our functional test coverage is high. Maybe your stakeholders prefer that you do more stress testing instead of functional test coverage, which is absolutely fine. That's what the business needs. But on the side, you still want to encourage them and educate them in understanding that we need to try and go through the whole life cycle of the different types of tests. So it's very important to find your stakeholders. The last piece, which I really, really stress about, is that numbers need a story. It's very important to have a story which tells you what the number actually means. 10 defects means nothing to anybody. It just means that 10 defects were discovered. Some people may turn around and ask questions like, did we fix those defects? Well, should we even fix those defects? Maybe it's a part of the product which doesn't get a high amount of traffic. You can determine that information using any type of observability which is being put in place. It's really about prioritizing and also helping the teams understand the impact of not fixing those defects, or the risk acceptance that, okay, if we don't fix um, a defect which allows the user to search for a hotel, what may probably happen is they may go to a search engine and type in the name of the hotel and go and book directly. We've lost that business. So you want to make it easy for the customer to use the website, and that will come in from the look to book ratio, at least in my case right now. So yeah, all metrics should always have a story. And also be open to understanding that sometimes you will measure something, but it will not help you improve the product's quality. It's okay to have metrics which you design earlier, you build some tooling around it, but it doesn't help you reduce the number of incidents, or it doesn't help the team write test automated tests faster, or anything which is what the stakeholders need. Be open to that, be open to the change, be open to discarding things that don't work. I think this is what really agility is about. um, I hope I have given some information to everybody about my brief journey in metrics so far. Thank you all for giving your time. It's almost dinner time here for me, but I'm really happy to, I'm and open to questions if you have any. And thank you for listening to this. Over to you, Sabine. Right, let's see if there are questions. There we go. Am I on time?
So perfect. Thank you very much, Umar. Um, Maryam, we have some questions here in the Q&A session. So if you can close your presentation, then maybe I will
Yeah.
not speak it off. So,
Yeah, I've stopped sharing. I think it's fine now.
yeah, okay,
Okay,
perfect.
brilliant.
So, um, one question. Yes, perfect. We have some time for Q&A.
Brilliant. Excellent. So,
So,
first question is from Ajay Vishal. He's a senior QA analyst. They're saying the quality of acceptance criteria. Could you please elaborate on how this can be measured or presented as a metric? It seems to be more of a subjective metric. Right. So, yes, I understand that what we can do is some things which can really help people understand the quality of acceptance criteria is one it should exist. We don't want stories with just titles. Secondly, you can say that it will be good to have some scenarios attached to the acceptance criteria saying, let's say we have personas for how a product is supposed to be used. You can actually elaborate on adding those user journeys. I think it is more subjective, but having some information in there, I think this really expands into more of a BDD topic personally for me. People talk about using BDD, and I think this is really, really where BDD should be used. That when you're defining acceptance criteria, you're actually trying to define it in a BDD way, which is not only Gherkin. There's many ways of doing that. And Nirvana would really be that those scenarios are what are translated directly into automated tests and really help you understand and implement the story as it is. So I think this is what we can do. And also there's also what you can also measure is that you can look into, you can combine this quality of acceptance criteria metric with the QA kickback criteria, which really means that the number of times a story has gone from in QA to dev, in QA to dev. We see that yo-yoing happening a lot. What is the real problem? Is it because acceptance criteria did not include all of the scenarios that we thought of when we started testing? Or did it mean that the engineer did not even run the code on their local environment before they committed it and asked you to test it? So really, I hope that helps you understand that you really need to think about, let's say that these are the absolute minimum things that we want included as part of acceptance criteria for a story, and this again needs to be confirmed with the team. I don't think you can say that it all teams should have three acceptance criteria or four acceptance criteria. I don't think that's what it is that we're talking about. I think it's about the completeness of acceptance criteria, which can vary from team to team in an organization. I hope that helps.
another question is how many of the metrics you presented today do you really actually use at booking.com?
So I've only just joined booking.com like a month ago. But my job just before that, I will talk, actually, there is one metric my team will produce by the time I got back from my holiday, and that was creating a baseline of a lot of teams are doing a lot of test automation, but I'm trying to answer the question of are we doing the right test automation? um, and this is, I don't want, because team tech leads are just coming to me saying I need a tester, I need a tester, and I want to understand why do they need a tester, what is the value they will bring. So the metric we're trying to measure is what are the number of user journeys that your team is responsible for. Of those user journeys, how many can we automate? If we can automate them, how many are already automated or how many are outstanding? And then how many of those are actually stable? That's going to be our baseline to understand that we have captured all the happy parts. And then we will look at increasing it. So if you think about it, it's more about functional test coverage that we're looking into first. Of course, it will feed into a wider quality strategy, but this is something which is really important, I think.
So it's not about using all of the metrics, but the right one, which are helpful in this situation.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So we are experiencing really many issues with the use of DDP, defect detection percentage. We don't have too many defects in prod, but in the case of this metric, is that we are not logging the defects we find in dev environment. Instead, we return the dev environment's feature. Dev his feature until feature is right. Are we doing something wrong here? Again, defects is really tricky. Some teams may say, "Oh, until a ticket is actually deployed, if we find a defect, we're not going to log it." Because if you think about it, a defect is the lack of an acceptance criteria being implemented, right? And some teams may say, "No, even if I find a typo on the page, I will log it as a defect, even if the story is not being deployed." I think in your case, what you're saying is you are not logging the defects that you're finding in dev, but you have a big flux between, probably a flux between ticket moving from in QA to dev, in QA to dev. And that is fine. If that works for you as a team, that's okay. But then how will you know? Something for you to think about is, how will you know that the quality of the code that is being produced by the team is actually improving over time? How will you know that the number of production incidents that the organization is finding, are they in any way related to a defect that you guys found earlier, which could have been fixed, or it was a low priority just because we didn't think it was used as much as people who developing the product, but then suddenly we're discovering that our end users are using that part of the product a lot. So I think it's a fine line. I wouldn't say start measuring and logging every single defect, but start looking into how many times a ticket is swing between from in test to in dev. And if that really starts happening, then you need to figure out, why is it that the ticket is swinging? Is it because of lack of acceptance criteria? Is it lack of test scenarios? Is it the increase of defects? You really need to think about that as a team.
Okay, thank you very much, Mariam. This was an interesting talk and also a good Q&A session, but we need to stop it right now here so
I
that we
know
can
for yeah.
with the
So,
next speaker on time. Thank you
yeah,
very
yeah. So
much
for
for.
people, sorry, for people whose questions are still not answered, I left my Twitter handle. Feel free to tweet to me. I'm happy to engage in a conversation, or you can ping me on LinkedIn. Please introduce yourselves as well when you ping me, and I'll definitely be more than happy to help you.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice holiday. And yeah, the rest of you, I hope we see back in 5 minutes for a tough talk. How to confront your opinion with your teammates. Sounds interesting. So, see you later. Bye bye, and
Bye,
thank you again,
everyone.
Mariam.
Thank
Bye
you
bye.
so much. Take care. Bye, bye, bye.